For this module, we're going to introduce you to seam lines. And this is another fitting device. So last module we talked about pleats and gathers. And now we're going to talk about using your seam line as a fitting device. So we still have to work around the dart. The dart is our primary shape definer. And then we're going to use this to define everything else that we do. So I'm going to make sure that I mark my bust point. But then I'm just going to trace this out. Whole thing. Once, and make sure you grab all of your notches as well. So here I have my bodice front. One of the ways that we can incorporate the dart is by letting it disappear into another seam. So this is how we develop a princess seam. So we're just going to do a typical princess seam where I take my dart, we're going to go over to the underarm. It might be nice for you to use a French curve or just some sort of curve for this, but I'm going to use this underarm notch, and I am going to blend a line just like that. Now all I have to do in order for this to become a true princess seam is cut this all apart. So I'm actually going to use this opportunity to add my seam allowances, add some of my labels. So here's my center front. This is going to be on a fold. I'm going to put my seam allowances everywhere. Okay, once I have my seam allowances everywhere, notice I haven't done anything in here because I'm going to have to deal with all of that later. I'm going to start taking this apart. But before I take it apart, I'm going to want to make sure that I have several locations marked. Number one, I'm going to put a notch about 1/2 inch. So at full size, this would be 1 inch. I'm going to put a notch right here. And I'm also going to put a notch 1 inch down and 1/2 inch down the other direction. So one here. I'll put one right at the bust point. Notice the bust point was a little bit off by like 1/8 of an inch, and I'm kind of blending around it. That's okay. Since I'm within a very short space away from here, it's not going to make a huge difference. But now I can come in and cut this apart, and I'm just going to come straight down this line. And I now have two completely separate pattern pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my front one all the way out. I'm not going to touch right here yet, down at the bottom. I'm not going to cut that one all the way out because I might have to do some blending to make sure all of my seam lines are the same length. So I'm going to cut a whole bunch out just so I'm not working around excess paper. And then right here, when I'm sewing things together, this little weird point that happens right here, I don't like that. That's going to be hard to sew. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here with a curve, or even just a very steady hand, and I'm going to blend through that. So it's a very, very smooth line, like that, so that these can get sewn together. Now I took a little bit of fabric out there, which means I might have changed the length along here compared to the length along here. So I'm going to need to come in here and measure the line up on top, which is 7 1/4, which means that when I come down here, from here to here, it needs to also be 7 1/4. Since I took some paper off, I can guarantee it's going to be a little bit off. Yep, it's 7 3/16. So I need to add 3/16 of an inch in length somewhere, and I'm going to put that down here at the bottom. And I will have to redo my seam allowance down here now. I'm going to take that 1/16 of an inch and I'm going to blend it in. Get rid of the other part that was there. Replace my seam allowance. I want a few more notches. I'm going to have one more notch, 1/2 inch down on this side, which means I need another notch 1/2 inch down here on this side. So I've got 3 notches right around the bust point. That's the most important place to have them line up. But now I can cut out the rest of this. Now that everything's cut out, everything can get sewn together, except for the fact that I don't know how I'm going to sew together this middle portion without without seam allowance on it. So once you're done cutting everything out, you can come back in and tape on all of your seam allowance. Just stick on some extra paper. Stick on some extra paper. So don't always throw away your scraps right away of paper, because sometimes you just need them to lay around so you have something to chalk on as seam allowance. We've added our extra paper. We can come back in and draw on our seam allowance on all of the seam lines that don't have it. Fill out your notches. Cut that out now. This piece is almost done. Fill in my seam allowance over here. Cut everything out again. Fill in my notches. And this piece is almost done. The final thing that we need to do is make sure that we have our grain line. So on this center piece, I already have my grain line indicated by the 3 dots. Got my notch taken care of up at the shoulder. I just need to label it. So this is going to be DJR 21 0 0 0. I did 3 and 4 last time, so this is going to be 5 for fall, and this is going to be princess seam. This is the bodice front, size 8, and I only need 1 of the self, and this is pattern piece number 1. For the side, I need to make sure I get my grain line, and I can base that off of multiple things. I could base it on the side seam, I could base it on this dart here. I typically like to base it on, if I were to connect a straight line between this inner point and this side seam here, I usually like to square up from there to create my seam line so that it's going straight down the middle. That's going to give us the most balanced fit. So there's my grain line. Notice no 3 dots. This is one of those indications because I don't have a fold that I have to actually draw the arrow. Now I can finish in my labeling. So if my pencil doesn't run out of lead. DJR 21. This is still the same style number, so this is number 5, my fall. This is the princess seam. this is going to be my side front piece. Still size 8, but this time I need 2. This one I had on a fold, so I could only get away with having 1. This one I want 2 because I've got 2 sides of my body. And this is pattern piece number 2. So I've got pattern piece number 1, pattern piece number 2, and with that, I have the princess seam. And that's how we transfer a dart into a seam line. There's one other time that you're going to see this happen. Not one other time. There's lots of times that you're going to see this happen. But one that you are probably well aware of is when we put things into yokes. And you probably didn't even realize that a yoke is just another way that we include a dart in a seam line so that we can fit over the back. So I'm going to use the back piece for that. So I've got my back. I've got a piece of paper. I'm just going to trace this whole thing out. And we're ready to go. For this notch, not for this, yoke, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a line and I'm going to draw it straight over 1.5 inches down from the neckline. On a full-size garment, that would be 3 inches down. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to square it straight over. Now, I am going to turn this into 2 separate pieces, but I want to get rid of this dart in the shoulder. That's the reason why we have yokes on the back of shirts, is because we're getting rid of the shoulder dart so that it's going to just be a lot more smoother for sewing. So I'm going to take the point of the dart. I'm just going to find the middle of this dart. I'm just going to connect that to this line. Actually, I'm going to erase this portion over here. Once I have that, I'm going to get rid of the dart. I'm going to slash down one of the legs of the dart. And then from here, I'm also going to slash over so that it is hinging. And then I'm going to close my dart. In essence, what I just did was open up the dart into the back. But I don't want a dart down center back, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this straight line that I have, the upper straight line, not the one connected to the rest of the back, but this upper portion. I'm going to take that straight line and I'm going to extend it straight through over into the armhole. And then I'm going to cut it off. So I now have 2 pieces. I can X out where the dart was because it no longer exists. I can add seam allowance. So I'm going to tape on a whole bunch to the bottom here. And I can add seam allowance all the way around the entire thing. I'm going to have the back on a fold, so I don't need seam allowance there. I'm going to have seam allowance on the shoulder. And I can go ahead and label this as center back and as a fold. And this piece is done other than some labeling. For this piece down here, I'm going to smooth over this corner. And now I can come in and add seam allowance right here. For this exercise, let's just make this dart go away. So I'm just going to draw a straight line across the bottom. And I'm just going to get rid of this dart. It just means that there'll be extra fullness and it'll be a bit more blousy on the back of this garment. That way we don't have to perfect the dart. It's just going to fit a little bit looser. So now I can add seam allowance everywhere. Nothing on the back, because I want that to be on a fold. And in the underarm. Go ahead and create a notch. To do that, let's just measure over from center back, an inch. Let's add a notch there, which means I need an inch away from center back on the lower one as well. This is going to be center back, and it's going to be on a fold as well. And I can go ahead and cut these all out. Once it's all cut out, I need to come back in and make sure I have everything present. So go ahead and make sure all notches are present for like the underarm. These notches are going to line up, and now we just need our labels. So this is going to be DJR 21000. This is 6 FA. This one's going to be the same thing. DJR 210006 FA. Remember, you can do whatever you want for your style numbers. So this is going to be a yoke pattern. This is actually the bodice back. It's a size 8, and I only need one of this in the self. And this is going to be number 1 for this pattern. For this, I'm going to call it the yoke pattern again, because that part needs to stay the same. This is actually the yoke pattern piece. That's what this pattern piece is called. It's a size 8. Now, I actually want 2 of these. It is on a fold, but usually with yokes, our construction method has us do a double layer. So for construction, I want 2 of this. And I want them both to be self. And this is going to be number 2. And there we have a yoke pattern. So for today's, you're going to have 2 as well. We've got our princess, which has 2 pattern pieces show up in it, and then our yoke, which has 2 pattern pieces show up in it as well. So this is what you will turn into me.